questions did you go to that really stood out in your mind? What did you pick up from the conference?
Well, this is the thing. I kind of feel like I didn't go to the same conference that everybody else went to because I was always working on board stuff.
Oh, right.
But I did go to a few. I have to say, I thought the one that I organized, which was a Friday morning breakfast session on reporting on climate change, was really terrific.
What was good about it?
I think it was really practical and pragmatic in a lot of ways. It was while it was both, people, especially Elizabeth Colbert and Bill Blakemore, were sort of issuing broad challenges to journalists to think differently about this story. It was also very practical in terms of the kinds of ways that you can get your head around local manifestations and local projections and sort of what is happening, what might happen. Rick Capcella from KARE TV in Minneapolis had some really great footage that he did of a series that he did, a 3-part series he did for local TV, revolving around some of the emerging signs of climate change in Minneapolis. I think that was really helpful to folks. In Minnesota, not just Minneapolis.
So what kind of practical tips came out from that?
One was not to get sort of overwhelmed by the science and the breadth and scope of the story, and and to talk to people on the ground. I mean, this first story of his 3-part series revolved around moose and disappearing moose in northern Minnesota, and the moose were not dying of anything that was directly related to heat stress or other obvious manifestations of climate change. But in talking to the scientists who in the Fish and Wildlife Service in Minnesota who were working with moose and other folks who were doing other research on parasites, they just found that there was sort of indirect link,
right,
a chain of links
changes
that
the
connected.
ecosystem and makes them more vulnerable to something.
Right, and they could not say this is because of climate change in the same way that you can't say that Katrina is because of climate change.
Right.
I mean, it may be perhaps more direct even than Katrina because hurricanes are so complex in what causes them to happen and go where and do what. And, but you can say, and I think this is one of the major messages that Blakemore and others delivered, was that this fits precisely within what the models say we should expect. And that as he started talking with other scientists, he found people within the Fish and Wildlife Service who were doing similar work on other species and finding similar results, and they actually weren't even talking to each other. So in that case, the journalist served the purpose of advancing the scientific understanding in a way, because he was connecting people in the same agency who were doing similar research on different species, not talking to each other, and astonished when they came together and found the results were so similar. So, that's the way.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've seen that happen in other instances, but so that was one really good thing. I think also, to some degree, the energy was really just starting to get going in the room when the thing was over. It started at 7:30 in the morning. It's the first time we've ever done any sessions that start that early, and it's really hard to generate a lot of energy and a lot of clear, cogent thoughts at 7:30 in the morning, or even at 10:30 on the day after the conference.
Yeah.
But it spilled over, and people stayed in that room until they shoot us out because they had to convert it for the next session.
Right.
And then I came out here to this spot, and Elizabeth Colbert is sitting on this couch.
I blogged that. I got some photos of that.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
With these 12 people sitting on the floor around her talking. And
so that's where that came from. I was wondering where that came from.
And it was people were talking with everybody in the session, with Rick Capcella and Mark. It's terrible. Woodward, the editor of the Bangor Daily News, which did a great 16-page pull-out supplement a year ago with the University of Maine on the science of climate change. Won an SEJ award.
Right, I remember that.
And Bill Blakemore from ABC News, who's really taken this on in a big way after having not been interested in environmental stuff at all for his whole career. Everybody, just trying to squeeze as much information out of all of these guys as possible. And they've all agreed to keep the conversation going through some kind of SEJ listserv on climate reporting on climate change. Andy Revkin of the Times has also agreed to do that. He was on the Murano session later
Oh,
on.
so this would be a separate list?
Yeah, and maybe at
Yeah.
some point it'll evolve into, it'll join the big list, or we don't know yet.
Right.
But I just realized that there was this amazing conversation that,
Oh, yeah.
that just was clearly just starting, and wanted to try to find some way to bottle it.
You
So,
see, and that's why I'm so fascinated by conversational media right now,
Yeah.
whether it's weblogs or email lists or whatever, because you get people together in meat space, so to speak, you
Yeah.
know, and you can find ways to extend and amplify the value of what gets started there. Too often, you go to conferences and it just dissipates.
yeah. So maybe that'll be a model for other stuff at SEJ conferences in the future, to sort of extend the conversation beyond the conference. I mean, that's one of the great things about SEJ in general, is that we do have the listserv, and there is this ongoing conversation between hundreds of people.
Yeah, and it's pretty good. Yeah.
And that's how much of that panel came together. Was I found Elizabeth Colbert, she was an obvious choice. Blakemore was an obvious choice, and then I wanted to get somebody from small market paper, small market TV. Try to, get some people who are doing local stuff that most of our folks do work in smaller markets, smaller, circulation papers and TV stations and the like. So I just put out the call on the listserv, and very quickly got a dozen, suggestions,
yeah.
and up popped Rick and Mark, and that was it. It wasn't that difficult to do, because if it's just my brain, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I know how
but-
that works.
So.